This episode may contain strong language and adult themes. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Good evening, welcome to episode 12 of the 22 Dropouts. We're a very unusual podcast and YouTube show. We aren't very good, but we like what we do anyway. Joining me on the 22 tonight from Malta, it's Sam. Say hello, Sam, with his trousers on.
Sam.
And we've got Lawrence back from Kenya. Lawrence!
Yay!
And we've got Chris over there with his zip on. James, all the way up in Inverness.
Leicester.
Me somewhere in the middle, and then Tom right at the bottom, not on his daddy's boat today.
Not today, God.
You haven't been on his boat for a while, to be fair.
No, you haven't been on the boat for a little while, mate. What's going on with
Not
it?
for a while. The Wi-Fi's not very good on the boat, so...
Yeah. maybe the underneath is getting a bit of treatment there, Tommy.
Oh, you stop that.
Oh.
There's been quite a lot going on in rugby circles this week, so we're going to avoid talking about that completely, and we're just going to focus on all the fun stuff that we normally do. So I've got something for Lawrence, because he's not been with us for a while. He's missed so many shows that we've got lots of stuff to ask him. Now, Lawrence, the best... Tom, what are you doing?
I'm plugging stuff.
Hey,
That's two in the space of 2 minutes. Fantastic.
Lawrence, don't look so worried, man.
Be worried. Be worried.
We want to know, what's the best prank or practical joke that you know of in rugby or you've been part of? Because we've all told ours, and it's now your turn.
Just for your information, I was chased out of the drama club because I was never funny in high school.
Well, mate, they must be missing you now because your dry wit is astounding.
Probably my if I can say on my part, the other day I was to issue a player with a yellow card, but unfortunately I'd kept my yellow card in my socks because my shorts had no pockets. So at that point of me going into my socks and trying to reach my yellow card, I'm not seeing anything actually. So we all ended up laughing with the player.
At least never run on the pitch without your cards, mate.
Yeah, go and get somebody, just tell somebody where they are in your bag and they'll go and get them for you. I've had to do that before now as well.
Did we not have a Rugby Europe referee on recently that actually forgot his cards and he had to go and get them for the fourth whistle of the manager or something?
He did.
Right,
I can go for one better. I've had to ask a parent to run into the change rooms and get my whistle. I've got my cards and I was about to do the toss and on the pitch and realised I'd not got a whistle. Yeah, you can go now. Come on then, James. I know you've been itching to tell us what practical jokes.
Look at his giddy. He's practically bouncing in his seat. He's like, come on.
He's sat back in his chair now. He's rocking it.
Look at it. It's time. Story time and Jackanory with James.
Yeah, no, you'll enjoy this one, guys. We had a guy who was a bit of a show-off, and he was on the weights all the time, but he concentrated mostly on his upper thighs and his guns. And every week before he went out, he used to put Vaseline to stop the chafing on his legs. Well, we'd had enough of this, so we very gently scooped out of the Vaseline a small layer. We filled that layer then with what was Fiery Jack. It's a deep heat type product, and then put the Vaseline back on.
Oh.
And he slapped it all over. He went out to play. 5 minutes later, he was running back in. He dove in the bath, which was the worst thing he could do, because he just got cold water onto a very hot area.
I've been involved with a few things with Vaseline before now.
This is not that kind of show, Mike. This is not that kind of show.
we did another really good one. Played rugby with a copper, and he was showing all the new coppers around all the various places. He took him to the morgue, and he had this one young copper that was a bit of a cocky sod, and he said, we'd like to get him and sort him out. He said, do you mind being our test? So when we pull you out, you're there, but you won't know you're dead. You're not dead. So they pull the body out. I'm covered in a sheet, and I can hear Johnny saying, if you just tap them in the stomach, sometimes because of all the gas build-up, they sit up. So he hits the stomach, and I just sat up and I said, do you have to be so brutal? At which point he just absolutely lost it and was running around screaming. A few weeks later, Johnny wants to get the guy back again, and he's asked, could he be the body inside the thing to get the new ones? And John said, yeah, you can do that. That's not a problem. He says to me, he says, we're going to get him again. He said, can you get there 10 minutes before him and be the box next to him? So he puts me into the freezer right next to him. So he's in there for about 5 minutes, and I just turned to him and said, cold in here, isn't it?
Tom, you must have had a few now that you've been down at Hartbury.
I think you need to put a disclaimer in that says, please don't try this at home, kids.
No, try. Do it. It's fun.
And I must correct you again there, Mike. I do not go to Hartbury College.
I know.
Although my university is still shit it's still not the top tier. It's not as shit as Hartbury.
Yeah, but because it pisses you off, we're still just going to keep saying it every week.
Yeah.
Just because it pisses you off.
Biggest setup, I suppose, that I've had was actually it sort of wasn't on purpose, but it was the last, not this year's gone, but the year before, the Leicester Sevens, when I'm on the line after young Christopher, and obviously that was a year when we were using shirts, swapping each other's shirts after each game. He's on the side there, already in a small enough shirt for him, which turned out to be a small, which then I had to try and squeeze over myself. Luckily, it was the old Gilbert shirts that had a little bit of stretch to them, and I managed to get it down to about my belly button and pull the shorts up a bit.
I think we might have a photo of that somewhere. If we have, yeah, it's coming on now. Well, look, I think we do need to address the elephant in the room now. Hands up, who thinks swing low should be banned? Okay, then. So moving on.
Just to get a bit serious, right? Okay, so it was written. No, because now he's started it. We've got to address it. And he'll probably cut it out anyway.
Well, be professional about it then, right?
I'm going to be professional about it, right? So swing low originated in 1867 by a black American slave. I don't see how some England fans singing that song celebrates slavery in any way, shape or form. It's a song about leaving slavery, for crying out loud.
You do make a very valid point, and in actual fact, it started within England rugby when Martin O'Fire scored a try. It's just caught. It's one of those things. Who knows why people started singing it? But it works as an anthem.
It's because they didn't know the words to Jerusalem, which is what everybody used to sing at Twickenham beforehand.
As a Scotsman, I don't want it banned because we want to tell you to shove it up your ass.
We're going to ride our sweet white chariots right up it.
Right up your ass, exactly. You can stick it up your ass as you're walking back home from bloody Murrayfield. Do you know what I mean? Because that's
I'm going to open the can of worms now.
Oh God!
Oh, no.
You know, there has been talk of Fields of Athenry going as well, and
Delilah.
Really, Delilah? Why?
Because it's
Delilah unhappy.
I felt the knife in my hand, and she laughed no more.
That's not the lyrics we sing up in Stoke, mate, at Stoke games. I'll tell you that for now.
You see, all of these things have good bits and bad bits. Do we need to wipe rugby clean with bleach? I don't think so. When you go to Ireland, you will get the Irish national anthem, and then you will get the combined anthem. In Wales, you should sing the national anthem. In Scotland, you should sing the national anthem because she's your queen too, and that is the national anthem of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. and then maybe sing something else. So perhaps England should sing the national anthem and then sing Jerusalem as well. I mean, how many songs do we have to have before we kick off?
I mean, looking into Swing Low as well, looking into the real origins of it, it relates to something from the Bible. It's about I think there was a
Jordan.
It was someone going to heaven, being taken on a chariot to heaven, and it was also linked to the Underground Railroad, which was actually freeing slaves. So it's not even about slavery and slavery. It's not even about that. It's not trying to do that. It's not written by someone supporting it or celebrating it. It's actually celebrating getting out of it, getting away from it, and being able to escape. So I don't see in that sense how it's a negative thing. Surely it's a celebratory song more than anything else.
The question really for me here is, guys, since we're being a bit serious, although it is about rugby, how far does any nation go to remove such things that have caused problems over the years or from the history of that country before you actually lose it as the part of the history of that country? How far do you go before? Now, I'm not just talking about removing statues. I'm talking about everything. They're saying about doing this, changing this, take away this song, changing street names. How far do you go before you actually lose the history of that country, which is very important. I'm not saying that what they're fighting for isn't right, because it is right, but there has to be a sort of balance somewhere along the line before, like you said, is it going a bit far by saying stop singing Sweet and Low Sweet Chariot? Should we stop, Fools of Athenry and then Flower of Scotland? And I mean, how far do you genuinely go?
I think the biggest thing is really who actually has come out and said, yes, this needs to be looked at. Is it just with all respect, an older white guy at the RFU who's decided actually we should look into this? It seems too reactionary, in my opinion. If it's clearly offending someone, of course you'd remove it.
Yeah.
There's no one over the
years,
or even now particularly, is going, oh, until this gets removed, we're never going to be able to see the end of whatever.
Yeah.
There's no one's really brought it to attention.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm saying, isn't it? How far do you go to say enough is enough? Or, how far do you go back? And how far, what do you do? Are you changing street names? Are you taking down statues? Are you changing lyrics to songs? Are you removing songs that people can't sing anymore? It's how far do you go before that balance is struck? But for me, I just want to make it clear to everybody, from my personal thing, I am fully against racism or discrimination.
I think we all are.
It'd be stupid not to be.
Yeah, in every shape or form, whether it be in rugby, against disabled people with impaired disabilities, anything like that. The colour of skin, whatever, doesn't bother me at all.
No, I think you're right. Nobody here, and nobody that I know is, hey up. Oh, I thought James was getting undressed. Then all I could see on this monitor was skin. And a bit more skin than we saw from Sam last week as well. but we do run the risk, I think, of wiping out history so that people can't actually learn that we did something bad back in the day. The Greeks had slaves, the Romans had slaves. Did we stop going there on holiday? I think it's time we put a lid back on that jar and we say, look, none of us here wants to see big changes.
With all due respect to Lawrence here, Lawrence, what's your thoughts on that stuff? What's your thoughts?
Say that. Can't say that, mate. Can't say that's not politically correct.
Yeah, they're right.
I'm not putting words in Lawrence's mouth because he can tell us. But you just want to be treated like everybody else, don't you?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
And does Swing Low Sweet Chariot?
Great input, Lawrence. Thanks for that, mate. Asking for an opinion, yeah, that's what I thought. Cheers, mate.
Yeah.
So, does the song offend you in any way, Lawrence?
Actually, I haven't dug to know the lyrics of the songs as per se, but to me, maybe a song of that stature, of that kind, as what you're saying, it will be bad for maybe England fans to erode their history. It's a good song to chant about when you're in the rugby fields or whatever place you're in. So to me, it doesn't seem more of a racial sort of discrimination stuff. But if you actually embrace those things now, like our traditions, which are good, then to me that song, it's just okay.
I think that's a really good point. If we were just singing this when we played teams from, let's say, Jamaica or something like that, I think that would have a much bigger connotation. But actually, we sing this to support our team, regardless of where they're from, regardless of what their race or religion, creed or colour is. We're doing it for positive reasons, not negative reasons. And I hope that's what people will see. Anyway, enough of the serious stuff, because we're going to take a short break, and after this, we'll be right back with today's special guest. Welcome back to part 2 of the 22 Dropouts, your favourite YouTube show and podcast, talking all things rugby and non-rugby, because we can't be bothered most of the time. But it is a huge pleasure this evening that we welcome the Elite Performance Recruitment Director from Leicester Tigers, Christmas favourite team of recent weeks, as we know. It's Jan McGinty. Jan, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, we're good. We've been
staying quiet this week.
Issues. Yeah.
I'm staying quiet.
What was it you said about Tigers last week, mate?
I can't remember, to be honest. I really can't.
There's an outtake. Check the YouTube show. There's an outtake.
It's escaped me. I don't know what I said.
Jan, back at training then. What's it felt like? How's it gone?
Oh, it's as we've it's pretty fluid times at the moment. So every day you seem to have to give an update. I think we had the first opportunity to get back to our training ground for some actual face-to-face rather than the virtual rooms we're now kind of used to on Friday. So myself and our CEO had some chats with some of the lads, and then we met some more today. So with a few new faces as well. So it's just it's a bit strange because everyone's adhering to the social distancing. Everyone's looking at social distance training and what that looks like. So you've got some guys just running up and down being flogged, but I don't know, it's just weird. But look, I think it's nice for some of them to see some friendly faces, and I spoke to a couple of the lads and they've been kind of on their own. Some of them don't have partners or don't have the dog or anything, so they've to get back to training. And like we all know ourselves, like in rugby, whether you're a ref, whether you're a player, whether you're an administrator, the actual routine is actually probably one of the things you get used to the most. So suddenly take that out of a coach's kind of mindset or a player's, they actually don't tend to know what to really do with themselves. So I think there's as much of it as kind of making sure they're physically trying to keep up to speed. I think there's a lot of mental anguish that's gone with the lockdown that probably professional athletes are as susceptible to it as anyone else. But it's just a case of now they're back seeing their mates. I think they're just so happy, even if they are being flogged within an inch of their life, just to be actually out seeing their friends and actually getting back to what they know.
How have you been? Because it's been quite a busy time for you, hasn't it? Either signing things with a pen or cutting people with the knife.
Yeah, it's been. I think if we were going to look for probably one of the accolades we could win, it's probably being one of the busiest clubs, if not the busiest rugby club in England for COVID-19 and the general pandemic. So look, we've made a number of signings. We've lost some key people. We've replaced them with some really good people. I think the reality of the professional sport in general, but rugby in particular, having dealt with something which is completely unforeseen, no one really knows also what the future could look like because everyone's scared of a second resurgence, whatever. But everyone's probably had to deal with this scenario on the hop and actually just almost learn as you go. So we've probably, the fact that we are the biggest club in the sense of turnover, season ticket holders, gate receipts, we actually probably can fall the quickest, but you'd also hope that we can actually resurrect the quickest as well as soon as we can get back in front of crowds playing again. So we've had to make a lot of decisions, a lot of the pain we've had to share with our staff and with our players. And so it's ironic because I always try to look at the positives in every scenario, and look, it's been terrible for so many families out there, and in particular we're looking at just sports, just probably the bit everyone really looks forward to, whether in the normal day job they do at the weekends, and we're lucky enough to partake and work in it. But ultimately, there's been some people that have lost their way a bit and trying to actually find, right, how do we get back to looking forward to rugby at the weekends or football at the weekends, whatever. So as a club, I think we've actually got some real positives in the sense we've got some new coaches coming in, got some really exciting new players coming in. And I think for us, it can almost be the start of a new chapter. And then we know we haven't been good enough for the last 2 seasons. But everyone is pulling together collectively to try to change the fortune of the club. And we hope this can be just the start of that.
So, I mean, they say that a new broom sweeps clean, and there has been a change around the coaching and DOR setup. Is that why we're seeing so many guys? I mean, what is it now? I think the headline was Tigers famously dump 21 players was the one I read on the back pages. It has been a bit of a clear out, hasn't it?
It has and it hasn't. I think the reality is that any team that doesn't tend to be in the top 4 will have a far higher turnover of staff than effectively the clubs which are established. And when you tend to see those successful teams, all of their coaches tend to have been there for a while as well. I think what the kind of the knock-on effect of why we lost a number of players were we had a slightly aging squad. We had a number of players who had been recruited by previous coaches. And this was probably the first time that Jordan had the opportunity to put his stamp on this squad. So we've kind of recognised we need to kind of plan for the future. We probably had a number of players coming who are kind of early 30s to mid 30s that were coming towards the end of their careers. So we've kind of looked for, I suppose, newer, fresher versions that might have the capacity to kick past those guys that have left. But we've also recognised that if you look at the most successful clubs in the league, effectively their academy have produced graduates that have gone on to play for England. Yes, we're very lucky in the sense that we had 6 England players last year, but we also finished 11th. So there were some fundamentals that needed to change from a performance perspective, not just with players, but with coaches as well. And unfortunately, there was a high turnover of players leaving, but I'm really excited about the new crop of players coming in and also the future of the club with that academy setup.
Yeah, so what sort of around that almost, so what sort of area do you completely have control over? Sort of what does your job fully entail? Obviously, that recruitment sort of side of things, but how much do you have control over?
So ultimately, the decision lies with the coach on the players. So what I would tend to do is look for the best options per position, but probably also in various, I suppose, economic ranges. So you've almost got a banding of players and what that could look like, because ultimately, if you probably spend high in one area, that could have a knock-on effect in others. And especially as the cap's coming down by 1.4 million over the next few years, you're going to get to the point where you have to be very economical with how your selection is of potential new recruits. So I think the reality is also that with the pressure on producing English qualified players, and we still don't really know the knock-on effect with Brexit, what that will look like coming to the end of the year. We're conscious that
there's certain places we don't go. Come on. It's a family show. You can't mention Brexit, mate.
Everyone has a choice. But we kind of, I think we're in a position where we know we need to try and ensure we had to go we signed quite a number of non-English qualified players this year, because in a World Cup year, you tend to find the majority of quality players are English qualified players tend to be in contract. So we're likely to have to recruit more English qualified players moving forward. So I think my first 100 days, I basically said I'd try and find 90% of the players available in the world. So I ended up going to Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and France twice.
Hard life, isn't it, mate? I've heard all the stamps down to Argentina. Yeah, mate. Look at that smirk. Oh,
but
that's a tough life, mate.
But the reality is that we'll benefit as a consequence of those trips. So, like, it's
of course.
We need to get better. We need to get stronger, but also we're going to have to be more innovative and trying to find the next generation of player, because we might not be able to pay as high as our peers, because that's just the way the market is at the moment and the financial position a lot of clubs find themselves in. So we're kind of preparing for that. But as I say, we're still going to have to look at that academy to produce our next generation of Leicester Tiger and England players.
Well, I mean, to be fair, while you may not have had the best of elite seasons, your academy always outshining other academies across the country. How much of a standing does this give them in the academy to come up to that elite level?
I think we're very lucky in the sense that the guys that come in so the guys we've had about, last year was an exception. We had 12 graduates. This year we had 6 coming in from the development squad into the main squad. The academy into our development squad. We call our development squad the same as most people's academy. But I think what we're lucky about is about 3 or 4 years ago, Jed and Dave Wilkes and Simon put together effectively a great to good school program. So there are a number of schools within the area that have potential opportunities for rugby scholarships, for actually producing good teams in the local area. And they put a lot of emphasis on that. And then also that tailored with the reach of our kind of under 16s and down to under 15s and 14s of the actual geographical area we have, going all the way across to Norwich and kind of going further up north. Leicestershire as well is a big county. So we've kind of recognised that we have the opportunity, and we've got some great schools in that area, catchment area, to produce those academy kids. Now, the hardest thing, I think that the toughest and best statistic I can give you is the fact I think there's 56% of players in Premiership squads came through the academy set up at Leicester, but you can't always keep them. And then that's what probably Saracens have found is the best example of that. Like Jacob and Marga came through our system with surplus to requirements, has done very well at Wasp. So there are going to be positions where you've got talent and you can't actually keep them. Because the other thing is, as much as you want to keep them, you also have to ensure there's pathways for that talent to come through. And the hardest thing about performance is every Saturday your performance is measured. Now, whether that's, if you've got kids you know could be outstanding players in 2-3 years' time, the reality as a coach isn't going to be assessed on that. He's assessed every Saturday. So it's how you strike that balance with blooding those youngsters with those guys that have been in the first team and actually ensuring that conveyor belt allows that to continue and bring that talent through. But it's a really fine balancing act. And you've got to have the support of the board, because there's some days it could be pretty rocky, but ultimately you will get a better squad as a consequence of those experiences the players get.
Sam, you got a question for Jan?
Sam hasn't read the script. Sam hasn't read the chat.
I have read the chat. Sam, I didn't hear the name getting
the last question. Okay, we're going to go quiet because you're just going to jump in now, and that's the last question on the chat.
So you want me to start talking now, then, or what?
Yes, now.
Right. Okay. So Jan. So what's your thoughts on the salary cap? Because obviously it's coming down, and I mean you've pretty much covered, with the stuff from the academy and the youth and things coming through. So I think you're, as a club, you're probably doing the right thing to develop players and have a big squad available. Although you'd probably get players pinched from you, because nobody ever wants to play for Leicester Tigers, according to Chris, anyway.
Just going to land you from Staffordshire.
Yeah, just going to land you in the shit there, Chris. But yeah, I just wondered your opinion on the salary cap. If you think it's a good thing. Or it's about time it happened, or it needs to bugger off and leave it alone, sort of thing.
I think the reality of professional sport, and particularly in rugby, which is only 25 years professional, is we're still trying to get it right. I think you look at, say, over the last 2 years, 12 clubs in the Premiership have collectively lost £89 million. And at some point, everyone's got to recognise that people, even as affluent as some of our owners are in the league, are not going to continue just to put their hand in their pocket with no semblance of a potential return in the future. I think what the potential lowering of the cap does do is allow clubs a potential window to eventually become self-sufficient. And I think as any business, you want that to be a viable entity. Now, what I think the pandemic's done is effectively potentially speed that process up. It's allowed conversations to happen probably quicker than most people thought, and there's still potential conversations around the global calendar. But as far as the Premiership stands, I think we've had to try and find a solution to try and make it a successful but also business successful entity. And this has probably come at the right time, because at some point there was always going to be a point where, so if you just take a step back, 4 years ago, I think the salary cap jumped up roughly £2 million. and you had a second marquee player, so all salaries bumped up, but actually the squad sizes didn't increase. It's just the salaries went up, and then the England money went up. So you're almost getting to the point where you've got your England players away for 40% of their time, earning 25 grand a test, but they're probably the most expensive players in your squad. So you then have to bring in players to replace them for the time they're away. So you're actually just constantly spending. So the other thing that's increased is now, on average across the league, I think 70% of clubs' turnover is spent on players' wages. So it's just it's almost just this monster that keeps growing, and it had to be addressed at some point. Now, players will probably feel a bit of annoyance more than anything, that almost some players will say, well, actually, I was looking for my salary to increase. But ultimately now we're going to have to look at salaries being at such a level that businesses can survive. So I can understand the reason. I think that the reason it was brought in originally was to try and make it a fair league. So potentially at any given day, a team could beat each other. My concern is with effectively some of the potential loopholes that have come out of the new salary cap, that some teams will still be utilising or spending very close to what they did and actually not adhering to the new cap of 5 million plus credit after that. So I understand the reasoning for it. I think it's the right thing to do to try and make rugby a business which works. Yeah. But I don't know. You'll probably see the proof in the pudding, because there might be 4 or 5 teams that are utilising loopholes and end up being a league of 2 leagues.
My worry would be that, not that I know the genuine price of what a ticket costs to go to a Tigers match or anything like that, but my worry would be that, clubs start putting the price of the tickets up to help sort of compensate with the financial burden and trying to recoup some of that money, and end up going the direction of a round-shaped ball game where, you're priced at the market with the common person that's worked his ass off all week can't go and watch a rugby game at the end of the week. Do you know what I mean? And that would be the bad thing that would come out of it.
Yeah, look, I think, to be fair, what I love about Leicester is it's a working class community. Half the city want to support the Tigers, the rest support City.
Did you hear that, Chris? Did you hear that, Chris? Working man.
What?
Yeah, you don't work, go away, go home, go to sleep. Play on your Xbox.
I see that there's a lot of similarities between. I've got family in Munster who are all Munster fans. There's a lot of similarity between that club, and I think what I love is the fact that most players see themselves as just a custodian of the jersey, and a lot of them actually were in the stands watching the team play. And I don't think they'll ever get away from the point of they want to make sure it's accessible for the average man on the street. I think the concern is around a lot of the wage cuts, the kind of the salary cap going down, and just the game in general. Is I still think there's still a lot further for this to travel. So there's potential cuts in central funding from England, which could have huge knock-on effects to what actually the clubs receive from the RFU, especially the fact that they're looking at potentially having to have an overdraft of £150 million just to deal with the lack of autumn tests and potentially the knock-on effect of the Six Nations being affected. So I think that there's still a lot to run within this story. So I hope, to be honest, by the end of this pandemic, and once we got back through the testing and back playing in front of crowds, that there's still effectively 13 teams within Premiership Rugby. Because there's some, I think, will take a bit more of a financial battering, and I just hope they're still here to tell the story.
Yeah.
So, back sort of early 2000s, we had the A-Leagues. It was a great opportunity to get development players that sort of first team experience as well. It's a proper meaningful league. I know that it's sort of come back with the Premiership Shield now, but I just wondered, do you think there should be more of an emphasis on that? On that sort of cup, or should it remain with just the league?
I think it's a really tough one, because to put it in context, to run the A-League costs you another £1 million for additional squad members. So in an era where you're looking at where your costs are, it's a considerable cost just from a player development perspective. I think one of the things that I know one of my colleagues, Dean Ryan, was looking at doing was effectively looking at clubs budding up with championship clubs, and effectively utilising the championship to properly loan players too. So we've had players on loan at Nottingham, Coventry, even at like Nat 1 clubs as well. Like, we've got a good relationship with Leicester Lions as well. So there's different clubs that could actually benefit as a consequence of getting some of our development players and giving them some game time opportunities. I think the A-League itself is good for the fact that it will be able to give them a higher level, almost that hybrid between potentially the Championship and the Premiership. The only issue is if you've got someone that's played at, say, a Saturday at a Championship team, he's only allowed to play 40 minutes if he needs to play on a Monday night. And if we talk around player welfare, that's got to be obviously paramount to a lot of these decisions. But from a pure development perspective, the fact that club squads are getting smaller, it's going to be harder to actually, like we've always wanted to try and make sure all of the participants in the A-League are from our own system rather than having to draft players in. But the reality is that you're getting games called off because squads don't have the number of players to be able to play the games. So I love the idea of it because I think it's the right thing to do to try to prepare players coming through and give them a better level of experience. I just think the financial connotations and the player welfare connotations are such that it's going to be tricky to continue doing that, especially if you say, if you've still got the Premiership Shield as a competition as well.
So is that why the A-League was stopped, mainly due to the financial reasons or welfare?
No, I think the A-League would still play, like there were still plans up until this for it to be played next year. I think it was just that the second half of it was due to be later in the season. So, so I think, look, I don't know, who knows what the future looks like from a league planning perspective, but I think there's still a lot of clubs that do see the benefit of it. It's just whether or not they will have the squad sizes to be able to continue playing in it.
I was just sort of saying that I've spoken about it there with obviously A-League being normally on a Monday, and sort of relating a bit back to when you were talking about, you know, the support that you have at Leicester on a game day.
Yeah.
What do you think about the days and the times that we're playing our rugby at the moment? You know, you look at sports like football, for example, they'll have multiple midweek matches, and they still get high attendances for those games as well. Especially obviously with, you think about a Saturday game, typically lots of those that probably would come down to support might be playing rugby themselves. So do you think there might be scope to look at other times of playing? Would that mess up the system?
I don't think it would mess up the system. I think you need to look at the demographic of each club and their supporters. I think our average age is 56, so they're quite happy with the 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon kickoff so they can have a few beers with their mates and watch the game. So I think when I was at Worcester, it's very similar demographics. But I also, the reality is every weekend you've got 3 games which are televised on BT. So they do naturally get pushed around a bit for different audiences. So I agree that if you are looking to potentially get the next generation of fan, they might already be playing club rugby, and that's obviously something you need to try and address. And whether that's making, when you play on a Sunday, making more of a family appeal and discounting tickets that way, or on a Friday night, a bit more of a student feel and kind of discounting beers for students, they can come along. But I think, as you say, like because of the
fact, all those ears prick up then from the young ones when you said discount beers for students. They all went, even Chris came back early from his wee-wee.
Yeah. That's exactly the way I've had to do it. This year being, I go to university in Gloucestershire, so I'm only in Gloucester, pop down 10-minute walk down to Kingsholm, and not Harbury. And so it means that I can easily just pop down the road and watch a game, but obviously on a Saturday and a Sunday, I'm often out refereeing or coaching. So Friday night is the only game that I can typically get down to Kingsholm. So it's just trying to open up, as I say, that let's see what would work best. I think that it's worked for football in some areas. It's interesting to see whether it worked for rugby as well.
Yeah. Friday nights have certainly worked for Sale this season.
Yeah,
and Newcastle. To be fair, like it's both places are difficult places to go play on a Friday night because you tend to travel up in the day. You don't tend to stay up. I think most clubs know what their supporters want, and then it's kind of, as you say, we've got an older demographic of fan. We know that they like a 3 o'clock afternoon kickoff. It works well for our hospitality as well. But look, I don't know whether that will change. We're almost as much in BT and CVC's hand on that than anyone else. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the biggest sort of influencing factor, isn't it? Really, that's what defines whether you're playing on a Saturday, a Sunday, or a Friday night at the moment. So it's all in their hands, really, isn't it?
It is. I mean, even if you look at some of those terrible European slots, like 5 o'clock on a Sunday, and you're just like, that's just the death slot. So it's kind of, you are at the behest of the TV broadcasters, but also they provide a hell of a lot of income for clubs. So you can't knock them too much because ultimately the game probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for BT's money at the moment.
Now, over in Kenya, who's been Yeah, Lawrence has been keeping a little bit quiet, and mainly because he's still tired. He's had to do some work. Other than feeding his cock, that's quite.
Stop!
Quite a lot of
You did not just say that.
I knew it was coming
Stop
back.
to feed-
I knew as soon as Lawrence was coming back, I knew the cock was coming back.
Oh.
He's feeding his hens as well, Jan.
Lawrence, ask a question, mate. Ask a question.
Lawrence has got a question for you, Jan. From your agency days.
Yeah, okay, so if I may ask, what's the best deal you've ever got as an agent?
Oh,
Ooh.
Now, there's hundreds of players now in the edge of their seat going, was it mine and why
Is it
not?
me? Is it me? Is it me?
I'd say there's three or four deals, not necessarily from a financial perspective, but from actually the players that I brought in conjunction with other agents to the Premiership. And I kind of look at some of them. So I was lucky enough, God bless him, isn't here anymore, Saru Rambini, that came to Leicester, and a hell of an athlete. I also brought Casio Giovanni to Leicester as well. Probably, I think, maybe one of the most underrated overseas signings in the league. I brought Nick Evans over. I think just the way he, to me,
Tom's happy because the quiz fan.
Great.
What was that, Tom?
But then I also helped bring Carlos Spencer over. So there's a number of, like, the finances, obviously, with All Blacks and people like that is always significant. But then you look at some of the influence some of the players had. So I remember I brought Dougie Howlett to Munster, and just going to see it was the Heineken Cup final when they won it, and his dad flew over, and there must have been 10,000 Dougie wigs in Cardiff, just guys walking around, and it was just, he made such an impact on that local community. And so, as I say, there's no one financially that stands out. Like Carl Heyman to Newcastle, you think, why did he ever go there? And he was one of the most iconic players there. I brought Matt Burt there as well. So there's guys that have worked really well and have actually taken off in this league fantastically. But I think all of them have come over, had a fantastic experience in the UK, and they decided that they kind of reflected on it and made some great friends and gone away and loved their time in the UK. So, so I don't know if I've quite answered your question, but it's
yeah. It's a good dodge.
I was going to say it was very much a politician's answer. That was. I'm going to skirt
with
it.
a dodge that good. I'm not going to re-ask the question. I'll refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago. It's customary on this show that we always talk about some of the best and funniest moments. The best prank you've ever been involved with in rugby. See, you only get these standard questions on the 22 drop.
Yeah. This is going to be another politician's answer, I reckon. You're not going to name drop anyone.
There's ones
Johnny Beatty's one was top last week.
Johnny Beatty's one was class.
You've got big boots to fill, Jan. I mean, we've got Johnny Beatty's last week. We got John Nichol, the war hero, with the sick bag, because that's the only one that probably wouldn't land him in jail, even retrospectively. So. You don't have to name names, but some of the practical jokes you've been involved with.
You have to name names. You have to name names. That's what it's all about.
He's just changed his story again.
Yeah. There's one which actually I wasn't there, but a number of my best mates were. So there was an English lock who played for the country, and I love him to bits. He's from the northeast. And he happened to be going on a school tour to Scotland, and was convinced by everyone, including the rugby master, that you needed a passport for Scotland. So this guy at school was about 6'7", 6'8", and a good 120 kilos. And basically for the journey there and back, was put in the overhead cabins as was for both legs of the journey. They told him about a year later, you don't need a passport for Scotland. So.
What year was this, Jan?
I won't. You'll be able to find out then. But I was looking at, so obviously some of the questions you said you kind of talk around, and obviously coming on to referee's podcast. It's quite funny because my father's a ref, and so, but he's still got the accolade of being the only ref that I've ever been sent off by. So
well done, Dad.
Yeah, it was like it was like an old schoolboys rugby game, and I think it's like we only had 12 and they had 15, and I got sent off for dissent for telling something off, and we had 12 men. We're suddenly down to 11.
You can't swear on this podcast, by the way.
Yeah, so having told my father to fuck off, I was basically. I was just
there we go.
My teammates, but yeah, so I don't know if that worked.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I don't suppose he signed the red card for you, did he?
No, we had one of them.
We've had one of them.
We didn't speak for a while after that, so.
Just very quickly, Jan. Me and Mike were fortunate enough last year to go and help out officiate at your corporate touch event for your sponsors at Welford Road. Unfortunately, we had to use your referee's changing facilities. I was just wondering if there was any plans to upgrade the changing facilities at Welford Road.
Great question. You've made Jan blush.
Yeah. That stand is 128 years old.
Twickenham's older, and the referee room there are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, they've probably got a bit more money than us. So
not anymore. They haven't.
The Crombie stand is a very obviously significant stand in the history of the club, but I still think it's because obviously every stadium now where you go to, when they actually change the stadium, there's certain rulings, as you all know, that each stadium and the refs' quarters all have to adhere to. But because it's been there for so long, we don't have to do it. So, I mean, even to be fair, if you get the chance to go into the home dressing room, it's not massive, but it's like a rabbit's warren of different rooms dotted around.
It is, yeah. In fact, it's no better than the ref room, even for the home team. It's not like when you walk into Twickenham and you see the England dressing room and how big it is, and then you go across the corridor and the away changing room, they're sitting on each other's knees. Leicester home changing room is just as shit as the ref room.
Was that Jan just officially asking, like, giving us a tour of the Leicester home ground? Was that an invitation for us to get a tour? Is it around the ground?
If you want to come along, we can.
You don't want one, mate. Trust me.
And it always rains when I go to Tigers. I don't know. Every time I go to Welford Road,
slatted it down.
Pisses it down. Slatted it down.
Yeah.
I've never been to a Prem game, so I've never been to a Premier Stadium either. So I'd love to, if that ever gets a chance.
Next time you come over, Sam,
we'll go to a Prem game.
Can we go to Tigers versus Gloucester? Because that's all be a good one.
No, we're going Tigers versus Wasps. We're going Tigers versus Wasps.
Jan's already told us he's getting us tickets.
I would say
live on telly now, is he?
I would say we go Wasps. I would say we go Wasps versus Tigers, but you just get a shit atmosphere with shit drums and.
Yeah. See, he doesn't criticise Tigers, mate.
I'll criticise the team I actually support because it's shocking. It's so bad. It's embarrassing.
Isn't that reflected in the amount of tickets they tend to give away for most games?
Precisely. Precisely. I'm not denying it in any way, shape or form.
That is the thing, though. They can't give the tickets away to fill that
stadium. There it is. Yeah, our stadium is in fact too big for
it. Did you notice that?
But then again, the stoop's too big for Quins these days, isn't it, mate?
No. The stoop is pretty full.
I think we can all agree on one thing, though. We can all agree on one thing. We can all agree on one thing. The Rec is a shithole.
It's the history. It's the history there.
It's the history.
Same again.
So, Jan, very quickly, before we go to our next break, the shoulders down the pitch at Welford Road do that. Now, some people, groundsmen, have told me that's to do with drainage. I just think it's to do with helping you lot hit touch on those long-distance kicks. Give me the scoop, man. I can ask you this on the next one. We're coming back straight after this break. Welcome back to part 3 of your favourite YouTube show and podcast. wherever you happen to be watching or listening to us tonight. We are the best one that's available tonight. I promise you that. Now, just before the break, I asked our guest Jan whether, when they relayed the pitch at Welford Road last summer, they got rid of those silly sloping shoulders that go from about 4 metres in from the touchline and do that. Now, bearing in mind it's a raised pitch, the groundsman once told me that it was to help with drainage. Now, we all think it's actually to help their kicking, because if they get it just inside the 5 metre line, it bows so much that it's guaranteed to go into touch. So, Jan, from the side of the pitch, from the horse's mouth, are those shoulders still there, and why are they there?
They are still there. I would have to bow to the knowledge of Ed, our head groundsman, and Cheryl, his assistant, who Cheryl's got 30 years experience at Welford Road, so she would be far better than me to answer the question. But I do know that the new pitch is laid at a significant cost to the club, and it drains far better. And as you've probably seen, there's not the bald patches that used to be there any longer.
There are when I look in the mirror every morning.
As a pitch, look, I think every team uses whatever advantage they can get away with, and if it helps some extra meters on his kicks, then it's not the worst.
Quite right. It's called home ground advantage, and everybody has it.
Now, before we move on and talk a few other bits and pieces and get into the rumour mill, I hear that as well as all those, we touched on the 21 that have gone, I hear today that there are another couple potentially leaving Tigers, and this could be down to the fact that they do not want to take a pay cut. People like Vianu.
The reality is we've got a lot of players that a lot of clubs would like to actually have in their own squads. As we've talked about on this in the earlier section, that the pandemic's had a massive knock-on effect to the finances of every club in the league. So we've had to look at ways potentially to reduce our wage bill. Now, every club's had to do it. I think all clubs agreed unanimously to some form of wage reduction across the league. The reality of that is a breach of contract. So we have to look at trying to support individuals who have family situations, and all of them are unique. And it's just about having clear, concise and open conversations with those individuals. So look, I envisage all of those boys staying and actually helping Tigers get back to where we want to get them. But ultimately, if they feel there's better opportunities for them to go elsewhere, then all we can do is support them and give them, shake their hand and wish them well. But I hope it doesn't come to that. But ultimately, we will not be the biggest payers in the world as a league and as a club. And the reality is that in France and Japan, there's still going to be players with far bigger clubs with far bigger budgets that unfortunately we won't be able to compete with. So that's the position that we're in, and kind of touch on what we touched on earlier. It makes actually producing your own even more important, because you know that they've got that link to the club, and hopefully that can benefit you to keep them.
Let's fast forward now 5-6 years, and the salary cap may well have come down again a little bit as well. Do you see less of those overseas players playing in the Premiership and more English qualified players?
Ultimately, I do. I think, as we touched on, and I don't mean to talk about politics again, but Brexit will have a significant impact on that. I think the league will look at having potentially you'll either have a percentage of your squad that is allowed to be non-British, or you'll have a set number. So the average squad size is coming down. We were 45 last year. We'll be 39 this year. And most clubs are heading towards 30s rather than the 40s, just purely because of finances. I think the reality is a lot of those guys coming in from overseas tend to look to come for financial opportunities. And we probably won't have them as much in abundance as historically has of a league, just because the league caps come down by 1.4 million. So I think it will become more predominantly EQP. I think that the concern is that if central revenues come down and also England match payments come down, the desire of players that are English qualified to stay in England to play for England will be less significant. So players might look to cash in their chips if you're at the beginning of a World Cup cycle, if there's not a Lions tour you're eligible for, they might look to cash in now and either go to France or Japan and try to make the most of their career whilst they can, earning the most amount of money they possibly can. So yeah, I do think it could potentially become a more English league.
What's the biggest difference from being an agent to a recruiter? Because you sort of poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yeah, I think. Look, I did 10 years as being an agent. The company I was with, we effectively bought and sold it twice, and I got to the point where I was probably, most of my job at the time was presenting to various boards how much money we were going to make as a business, and the personal element around why I originally got into the business, around looking after individuals and giving them good career advice, was effectively taking up less and less of my time. And the other thing is I actually started, and this is probably just an age thing as well, as I actually started enjoying looking after coaches more than players, because I could go for dinner and have a glass of wine with them and I couldn't necessarily with players. So, and by the end, coaches were earning quite a lot of money. So actually, in some instances, it was probably better financially to do that. But I think that the reality is that you do have a finite career as a player, and there are times when you have to maximise that. It is becoming such that players' expectations are getting higher and higher, and it's probably getting more aligned to football in the sense that they do look to their agent to provide a lot more. I think the difference probably is on the other side, you probably have to be a bit more open-minded, and you're in competition with the number of agents. There's nearly 150 registered agents in the UK now. So you recognise that everyone's trying their best thing. And what kind of didn't feel right with me was having to chase after or look to speak to the parents or guardians of players under 18 to discuss potentially representing them. And I didn't get into the industry to do that. And also, you also look to, most of my deals or looking after players is done on a handshake, and it was quite old school, but I quite like that. And now you obviously have to cover yourself by getting them all signed up to make sure that you're from so many different facets of the industry, but just to effectively protecting your income. But so having gone to the other side of the fence, you're now looking to try to work with clubs to, in some instances, I work with clubs such as Worcester, where you're almost having to start from scratch. You know you can't compete at the top table, so you're actually having to look at things slightly differently. And that's a challenge in itself. Obviously, working in Scotland, they're operating on slightly different budgets, and the Pro 14 is a different competition. You're obviously in Scotland, you're also probably trying to be a bit of a custodian of the game within the country. So you're trying to plan for the future, so they've got good prospects coming through that can qualify for the national team. It's probably less of a thought as such, trying to provide players for the national team when you're working for a club, because effectively the clubs are their own businesses in the Premiership. So I think that the best satisfaction that you can probably get from being an agent and also working for a club is actually just watching some of the younger players and see how they kick on. I love the fact that you can't cap youth in the sense of the potential of that youth and where it can go. And like, for example, we've got some amazing kids in our development squad, and there's a few of them who have played for England 20s a year early this year. And I think some of them could generally go on to be 100 cappers for England. And I think they have the ability to be in a system that will support them and also learn from some of our pretty outstanding individuals. I mean, if you're a young 9 coming through the system, to have Ben Youngs as a guy you can train with every day, how good is that? To watch George Ford and how professional he is and actually learn from him. So but even players like Dan Cole, who've got 95 caps, he's been on a couple of Lions tours, or he's got one of the darkest humours in world rugby. For a young prop to learn from him is fantastic. So it's just I think you can only do what you can to try and get players into a system, and obviously they've got to take that initiative themselves and actually see where they can go with that talent. But that's the exciting bit, and I think hopefully we'll see some of that talent come through over the next few years.
I mean, depending on who you talk to, especially if you talk to Squidge Rugby, having Ben Youngs in your squad might not be the best experience for a young player after all.
Yeah, I think most people think that Eddie Jones is a reasonable judge of player, and he's been in every squad he's ever had.
Yeah.
In fact, he made his debut at 19. He's got 99 caps. I'd say anyone that's shit.
You see, I'm not saying he's shit. I think he's a good. I think he's a good man.
You say Tigers are shit every week.
No, Tigers are shit. I never said Ben Youngs was shit.
I would still think that Benwell could go on to take Jason Leonard's record of 115 caps. I still reckon he'll be one of the 3 scrum halves going on the next Lions tour.
You heard it here first.
That's the rumour mill already.
That's a rumour mill.
There's going to be a Scottish scrum half this time.
Don't be silly.
Don't be daft.
Hey, we can live
A
in
quick
hope.
question, Jan, if I may ask. Which players made you laugh most, either as an agent or a recruiter?
Good question. I must admit, I do enjoy currently, like Ellis Genge has got a very funny sense of humour, but I like Dan Cole as well. He's good fun. To be honest, like, I've kind of mentioned him already, like, Saru had one of the craziest sense of humours. He was just a larger than life character, and you speak to a lot of guys that played with him at Leicester. He was just fun to be around. And look, I didn't know whether I'd be having to potentially get him out of jail to do his next deal, but he that was part of the intrigue. I looked after another guy called Dan Parks who played for Scotland, and Parksy was just a character. And like we kind of, I suppose the problem with professionalism, and it isn't a problem, it's just the way the game has gone, is you're getting less and less characters. They're all kind of very much taught in a certain way. And I like guys that know their own mind, know their own sense of humour. So the game kind of cries out a bit for characters. And obviously that's probably why Ellis seems to be kind of one of most people's favourite players at the moment. Because
Sausage man.
He just doesn't care, does he?
No.
He'll say what needs to be said.
Yeah, and as you say, like, we had, when I was at Worcester, I brought Donnacher O'Callaghan to Worcester, and he is a very funny individual. Like, for someone that has never drunk in his life, like, you think like he's had 10 pints walking to training, but that's just him. And he's just a really, really great character. And as I say, like, if we can continue to have those in the game will be stronger as a consequence.
Now, Jan, I don't know how many of our wonderful episodes you've actually watched as research, but we do have our favourite part of the show. It's the viewers' favourite part. All those millions of viewers always ask us what's going on in the world of rugby, because our finger's right on the pulse always. Usually 4 days late, but it's on the pulse. We find it eventually. It's time for our rumour mill, and tradition has it, it's not a big tradition, but you stuck with it anyway, that we always ask the guest first for the latest rumour that they have heard in rugby. Over to you, Jan.
Ooh, I don't know how many of them actually allowed to be put out.
I do have to temper this, that normally most of our guests don't care. Most of our guests have got no clue about any rumours, and they're just guesses. But actually, in this case, Jan does have a clue. There are certain people who've been seen walking the streets of Leicester recently as well.
You can see him.
I don't know how many.
He's like, what can I say? What can't I say?
Has this been press released yet?
There's a colleague of mine, Sam, who heads up our digital marketing side, and he would be going crazy at this point, just thinking, what is he going to potentially come out with? So I don't want to.
I tell you what, Jan. I tell you what, because you are in probably the most unique position of knowing every single rumour within the Premiership.
He's going to let him off the hook. You're going to let him off the hook.
No. We're coming back to Jan a little later. First of all, because I know Chris has got something to do with Northampton Saints, we're going to let Jan have a bit of thinking time, and we're going to go to Chris, and we're going to talk about Chris's rumour.
He's now messaging Sam like, Sam, what the fuck can I say?
I will say that it depends how long Mike takes to edit this show before Sam has to post it out on social media that you've lost or gained a certain player.
That's true, mate. To be fair, you've got till Sunday. You've got till Sunday,
mate. At least Friday.
Anyway, so there is potential that Dan Biggar may be leaving Northampton to go to a second-tier French club.
what you mean is Dan Bigger is leaving and he's going to Bezier. My rumour, mate. My rumour.
No, well, it's not your rumour because you didn't fucking say it was your rumour, did I? If you said it was your rumour, I would have found another one.
Excuse me, that one should have been mine.
To be fair, I didn't think anybody
it's
else
my
would say
rumour.
this one.
Oh, hold on. It's my rumour.
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus.
Now that we've all said that our rumours, Jan, it's back to you.
That's harsh, man.
We don't think that's true because I know Bezier they've got a new owners and they're actually looking to try.
You just pinched my other rumour.
Dan Bigger, I reckon he's in contention for a Lions spot, and I think he'd like to try and play to the next World Cup because I think if you look at the depth at 10 in Wales, there isn't a huge amount, and I think he'll be there or thereabouts. So also him being one of two marquee players at Northampton, and it may go down to one, but I'd still think they'd like to retain him. So I would question that rumour. But it's only trying to detract from the fact I don't know what I can say. So.
There's 4 big names. Dan Bigger was one of them.
Yeah.
You've also got Man Onu, Bowden Barrett, and Juan Imhoff. I don't know who the fuck he is.
Did everybody notice that when you mentioned Bowden Barrett, that Jan smiled really, really widely?
Oh!
did
Body language is everything, Jan.
I think he's
the referees. We notice these things.
Yeah.
So Bowden sound like a 4-year deal in New Zealand, so that's never going to happen. The reality about the Argentinians is quite an interesting position because they're not going to play Super Rugby for 2 years. The only rugby they can play is international rugby. So there will be a number of players looking to come over to France, probably, and then England as well. In England, they're an overseas player, so each squad only can take 2 in the matchday 23. So I think the majority of them, and he was at, I think he's still at Racing, so he could potentially be one. But I don't know. The problem with the rumour mill, and obviously this is COVID's kind of probably delayed some potential signings, but also because everything's going on, there aren't obviously as many signings because people's budgets are either being questioned or being put on hold. So Michael Hooper is, I believe, going to be signing for a team in Japan because he's got a sabbatical that the ARU have allowed, or Australian Rugby Australia's allowed him to take. So I think if you look at it currently in financial terms, Australia are struggling. I think it's going to be interesting to see the format of what Super Rugby will look like for them. I can see a kind of trans-Tasman competition, potentially with, if you include the Force, you might have 5 teams in Australia, 5 teams in New Zealand. So that could be feasible, home and away, 20 games. It's a Super 10, Super 9, depending on the Force. So that could be quite feasible. And obviously, at the moment, because there's a 2-week quarantine, they could do one of these the air bridges between the 2 islands, probably get away with it. But I also see a lot of merit in the South African teams coming into the Pro 14 just because of the time zone. I think most fans at Scotstoun would love to see some Sharks and Stormers cheerleaders come along. So you can see
Michael Hooper's been in the news as well because Dave Rennie's come out and said that there's no chance. There's a possibility that he may not remain the Wallabies captain.
But I don't see when Australia will play next. They might try and play some Bledisloe Cup games. And obviously, NRL was back, and that's huge for them because they've actually got the opportunity to play a contact sport. And by the time potentially they look at the championship after Super Rugby, I can never say it. It sounds like aorta, but it's probably pronounced far better in New Zealand. But you're looking at kind of when the traditional autumn test window might be when they play their rugby championship or the Bledisloe Cup at least. And you would have thought by then they'd be playing in front of crowds in the Southern Hemisphere. If they're doing it already in New Zealand, you'd envisage it happening in Australia. So, but I can't see them coming back up to Europe for potentially another 15 months. I mean, that's the autumn tests in 21 could be the first time that Australia and New Zealand travellers outside of that bubble to the Northern Hemisphere. So it'll be interesting to see how the unions in the North survive because obviously you look at the WRU, they potentially were going to lose, or they normally have to it's 26 million. There's a central funding model. They were only going to be able to pay 3 towards that. So they've had to go to the government for a 16 million loan, just to allow the regions to survive. You've got the Irish model where they're suffering as a consequence of not being able to play their last 2 Six Nations. So they talk about 20% pay cuts across the board in Ireland. So every single market's got its issues, and actually how they kind of deal with the next 12 months. And unfortunately, the headlines is the fact that the players are getting hit. But like at our club, 75% of wages that's across the board. So that's all staff. And then we're having to make potentially up to 20 odd redundancies on top of that. So it's a pretty tough time. And I think we're almost ahead of most clubs. And I think other clubs will be in the position where they're having to look at redundancies as well. So it's not ideal, but hopefully when we start filling stadiums, we can get some of those staff members back and hopefully get back to a full match day experience.
Definitely.
Yeah, and on that sort of almost.
Hang on. I'm not letting anybody else tonight pinch my room because I did a bit of research this week because I keep getting shit that I host the show and I don't come up with a rumour. So I'm going to continue on the Béziers front. It is a second tier team. Now, there is talk of a €10 million takeover from a consortium based in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Now, tonight, Monday night, they have to provide their financial statement to Béziers to continue with the takeover. But not only have I heard Dan Bigger and Bowden Barrett are linked with the club, but also the potential new owners want Michael Checker. Now, that fits very, very nicely into James's rumour about Gloucester, because, of course, Checker was linked with there, wasn't he, mate?
Yeah, he was, but there's been 70 applications for head coach at Gloucester. And
it was Tom Reed I heard on the grapevine.
Well, you heard wrong, because it's George Skivington.
You have? Yeah, it is. I've heard that today as well. I think he's a really good coach. He's sort of sailed under the radar a little bit, but he's been a really good backup coach and forwards coach for a couple of teams, but most notably London Irish. I think he'll do really well at Gloucester. Tom, fancy a bit of George down there?
Yeah, so first thing I was just going to ask Jan, really. So that's sort of I've been thinking about recently. I think we've spoken about it a few weeks ago now. Obviously, when fingers crossed, touch wood, the Premiership does be able to get back soon and restart the season from where we left off. Obviously, a lot of the players' contracts are only sort of up to the end of June and July time, so they are technically ended, no longer meant to be playing for that club. Yep. Is there any real idea of what is going to happen? Are they going to stick with the player contracts in that they've ended, so therefore they do go to their new club and finish the season at their new club? Is there any sort of news on that?
Yeah, so basically they've relaxed the registration laws. So effectively, if a player leaves his contract, I say Johnny May leaving us on the 30th of June, he can be selected for Gloucester from the 15th of August when the season theoretically will resume. So I think it's down to, there'll be certain instances where in some of the players that are replacing potential players either can't get in because visa centres are shut or they're in lockdown. So it might be there'll be some short-term contracts to cover those entities just to play the last remaining 9 games. We made a conscious decision as a club to actually, if players' contracts finished on the 30th of June, we felt that was the right thing to do, was allow them to leave. And we would try and give our development squad the opportunities to play, because like it's going to be whether we manage to get back on the 15th of August, where there's still question marks around whether we play in neutral venues, whether we play at home, whether we play in front of crowds, whether we don't, how much testing is going to cost, how many times we have to test, who's going to cover the cost for testing. So considering we're potentially meant to be playing in less than 2 months, there's still a lot of question marks around the actual how that happens. But just for us, we just felt it's the right thing to do to actually ensure some of our younger members of the squad get the opportunity to play. And then as new players arrive from the 1st of July, if and when they're fit, and if from a welfare perspective it's the right thing to do, we'll introduce them to the squad as well. So we've probably looked at it slightly differently, but we also have new coaches starting on the 1st of July, so they'll have a bit of an influence over this existing group for the remaining games, but then hopefully start having more influence leading into the start of the 2021 season.
No, it's very interesting. It's something that I think that it was the way that I was thinking of it, is that it's probably going to be left down to individual clubs to really sort of decide and work out with the players, especially with obviously the sort of massive flexibility that's going to be needed with player contracts anyway, with regards to all the new wages and stuff. So I think that hopefully
is, as you pointed out, Tom, like the traditional finish date of a contract in the Premiership is the 30th of June, and the standard player contracts go from the first start to the 30th of June. If for whatever reason our start or the resumption of this season's league gets pushed back, and then we potentially don't start the next season till January, are you going to be able to complete the games by the 30th of June? So then you're in exactly the same position again. So I think that will be interesting to see where that goes. But I mean, I think probably the team that's licking the lips the most around their new players being able to join leading into the last games is probably Bristol. So you bring Sinclair in and bring Lampard in. They're probably laughing at the fact that there's the number of Sarries that I think they've got Earl.
They've
Naylor,
got a fair few coming on loan as well, aren't they?
Yeah. So I think that they're thinking, well, we'll play those boys and we could potentially look to get to the knockout stages and potentially look at trying to win it.
Sam, over in Malta, you've got something about the NFL Rugby Challenge, you've heard.
Yeah, so basically, apparently, so, you know, I'm not a Twitter guy because I just don't follow that nonsense.
Is this about Marquette King?
Oh, get stuffed, Chris. See, cut him out. Just cut him. Cut the
Well,
cord.
do your proper research then.
Chris.
You want to fucking take over it? Go on then, it's your fucking thing. Go for it.
I've got it in front of me. So Saturday, June the 20th, at...
Dan, it's over to you. Let Sam do it.
Go on, Sam.
So apparently this Denver Broncos ex-punter or whatever reckons that he would be able to smash it if he played rugby. Like, he would just be like the dog's bollocks kind of thing. And, well, Twitter then went fucking mad. And you had New Zealand team, actually, the All Blacks, saying, well, you know, leave your pads and helmet back there and come over on a training session with us. And I think there's somebody from Tigers responded to him as well on Twitter saying, man, yeah, go and sort yourself out, mate. Get over here and we'll go.
He exactly said, I'd bend him right up, stick to wearing your bike helmet and shoulder cushions, my boy.
Yeah, exactly.
So after all this shite that he got, a day later he went, I've got to admit, the passion that people have for rugby internationally is deep. I love the passion you'll got with peace symbols, because he doesn't want to get fucking swatted.
To be fair,
it's a good question, though. Would
to be fair,
players actually make it in rugby?
To be fair, back in the 70s, two NFL players came over to play rugby league, and they lasted 6 weeks. They couldn't hack it at all. It was way too hard for them.
Well, you see, because NFL is about, you know, they play for like 10, 20 seconds, but everything they do in that 10, 20 seconds is explosive. So it's all about power, right? Whereas, you know, our rugby players usually tend to last 80 minutes. Let's say most front row players will last 60, but that's because they're trained and conditioned to do that. I think NFL players can succeed as rugby players, but their training regime, their mentality, everything has to completely change, especially on the strength and conditioning stuff.
It's because they're mainly taught to tackle like Owen Farrell.
Chris, I'm gonna have to disagree with you. You know, I mean, you know, I'm not an England rugby fan, and I'm not a fucking Farrell fan, but let's be fair, you're a referee. How do you even class it as a tackle? It wasn't a tackle, mate. He never put his arms out.
That's what I'm saying, mate. I just said they tackle like Owen Farrell because the way they tackle is like that.
Do you know the law? The law is a tackle. What's the fucking definition of tackle, you muppet?
No,
it means arms bent brought to ground. It wasn't a tackle. It was a shoulder.
He's off, and he's on a Scottish little yap now.
Yeah, I need the translation and subtitles at the bottom. They'll be coming later, kids. I think James needs to go to his 1989-99 law book that he was processing around for us earlier on.
He's actually got
And
it.
find us that, I mean, look how old that is. It's nearly as old as James. Or
No,
at
it's
least his beard. You researched the definition of a tackle. In the meantime, I'm afraid I did cut Tom off earlier because I didn't want him to jump on any more of my rumours, but he does have another one, and he's going to tell us all about Marlon Yard, aren't you?
I am, yeah. So it's been rumoured by the rugby paper that they think that Marlon Yard's going to extend his contract for another 12 months at Sale. And Marlon's reply on his tweet to that was, at least get your facts right at the rugby paper. Article is complete BS. So whether that actually means he is looking to move on somewhere else, and that's something he's actively doing, perhaps
Jan looked down and smiled. Jan looked down and smiled.
I think
suppose you have lost a winger.
You have lost a winger.
I'm sure in the forthcoming weeks we might be in a position to announce a new winger coming on board.
Oh! Tom's opening up a can of worms here.
You know what? That would be a perfect time to end the show. But before we do, we're going to go live to James in Scotland, who is still looking for the definition of a tackle.
Because in that law book, the definition of a tackle is 3 pages long.
Do you want me to
Strap in, folks. You're here for a while.
Definition of a tackle is when a player has been brought to ground legally by using arms being wrapped around a player, not fricking shoulder charged.
Mate, that's what I'm saying. I was saying that's how NFL players tackle. That's how Carroll tackles.
You used the term tackle, which means you were incorrect in your...
Anywho.
Anyway, listen, we have come to the end of tonight's show, I'm afraid. It has been wonderful. Yeah. We have had a wonderful show. We talked about some serious things that are in the rugby headlines at the moment. We've talked some fantastic rumours. I'm not sure we've really got one from Jan tonight.
Well, we have.
I
managed to squeeze one out of him, which is a very something might happen.
Something might happen.
So before we run out of time completely, I want to say good night from me, good night from the 22, and good night to Jan. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you research what we're going to put you on the spot for next time, you can come back and join us anytime, mate. You take care. Everybody at home, take care, and we'll see you soon. Good night.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye.
As always, please make sure that you go and check out the great work of the Doddy Weir Foundation as well. Just head to www.myname then the figure 5 doddy.co.uk, and don't forget, early next month it is Doddy Weir's 50th birthday, and we'll be doing something special to celebrate that. Make sure you join us on our special Doddy show as well.